Not that we're going to change their behavior with the poster. In fact, we know that scare tactics and just the basic passing along of information, statistics, and so on and so forth, are very, very weak at changing behavior. In fact, almost ineffective. But what they may do is they may move people along the stages. So they may take someone who's a pre-contemplator and cause him or her to reflect upon their behavior and say, wow, maybe I should change. Maybe they take the contemplator and move them to the preparation stage. And so that's really the value we believe in some of those interventions that are consciousness raising. So for example, signs of asbestos, causing people to reflect. This is very popular, especially in states that require disclosure of asbestos. In California, for example, we'll see these signs frequently in buildings, as they are required to make people aware of asbestos, and people oftentimes will become more cognizant. I don't know if they actually change their behavior, but maybe more cognizant of the type of activities they engage in those buildings, so as not to inhale or otherwise ingest asbestos. And I should also point out here why these billboards are specifically targeting the early stages. So if you're in the maintenance stage and you see this sign, really all it is for you is entertainment. So you would see it and you'd say, oh, wow, yeah, boy, that's kind of cool. I wonder if that's a real body underneath there. But it's not very personal to you. You don't really care about it. I see these all the time, and I don't really care about them. If you are in the early stages and it captures your attention and causes you to say, wow, I'd like to quit, what's the first thing that you see after that? Well, it's probably the phone call, or pardon, the numbers that you can call, the information where you can gather information about helping you quit. And in fact, the California Tobacco Control Program, again, founded upon the Transtheoretical model, is very efficient at this. And so you'll see a commercial, and immediately after the commercial, where they've captured your attention, hopefully moved you into along the stages, in those early stages, perhaps to a contemplator or a preparation stage, and then immediately you're hit with the phone number you can call to quit. Again, if you're in the late stages of maintenance or termination, that's irrelevant to you. You're not writing down the number unless it's for somebody else. But really, it's you don't care, except sometimes it confirms that, yeah, that was a good decision for me to quit. Other examples of raising awareness.
That burger and fries, or even that creamy latte, may be costing you more than you think, or care to know in calories.
Vegetarian burrito place.
A new study finds consumers are highly unlikely to seek out pamphlets or other on-site nutritional information at fast food chains. Researchers at Yale observed more than 4,000 customers as they entered and ordered at restaurants, including McDonald's, Burger King, and Starbucks.
Out of that 4,000, only 6 people, so that's 0.1%, of customers were actually accessing nutrition information.
To help fight obesity in the country, researchers say the observational study suggests calorie information should be displayed in plain view on menus.
I don't think.
Okay, so raising awareness, and this was part of the new health law enacted recently, that large restaurants, chain restaurants that is, would have to disclose the caloric content or value of food items. And so raising awareness about what you're eating and the behavior that you're engaging in, diet-related behavior. And so, again, if you are already dieting, this may just be informative, but it probably isn't going to change your behavior because you already know that a Big Mac has a lot of calories. Okay, the next process is dramatic relief. And dramatic relief is this idea that we want to get people emotionally involved in an issue. So we want, for example, with respect to tobacco or substance abuse, we want you to be emotionally energized or charged about the issue. We want you to to beyond just kind of this scientific or academic connection of, yes, I know that it's bad. We want you to really have this, have this tug at your heartstrings where you really care about it. So here's an example from Nevada, a intervention based upon dramatic relief to get parents to talk to their kids about ecstasy. So this is an actual death certificate. So if you were to see this death certificate and you're a parent, it causes you, maybe not in like an overwhelming way, but it does cause you to look at this and say, wow, I would hate to see this. I would hate to see my child's death certificate. I'm going to start talking to my child about ecstasy or about drugs. These types of commercials are very common. Not so common in the United States, but in Europe and other places. And they're very dramatic. So you see them and you say, wow, that's very dramatic.
This is Michael. Today he's going to hit his girlfriend so hard, she ends up with permanent brain damage.
Dead in this vehicle. Service critical. They say the guy with the seatbelt did the damage.
No seatbelt, no excuse. From DOE, supported by AXA Insurance.
Okay, so when you see that, it causes you to be emotionally charged about the issue and to say, "Wow, that's horrific." There are other examples. One I've chosen not to show. But it's related to texting and driving in the UK. Perhaps you've already seen it, but there was a radio piece about it recently, very graphic, and there was a radio piece about it recently where some NPR correspondents went out and asked people, they showed them the PSA and then asked them, will this change your behavior? And of course, when you see that, you say, wow, that's very dramatic. And probably what happens is it confirms people's report that probably won't change my behavior long term. And that's very consistent with what we see with a lot of these approaches, that they don't change our behavior long term, but they do cause us to think about change. And so again, that's the value in these, is moving people along the stages of change, which is why these are more important strategies or processes in the early stages of change. Okay, self-reevaluation. So self-reevaluation is where we are able to kind of reflect upon our own behavior, and to and by the way, I would also like to add that these next couple of not constructs but processes are not very common in the literature, but I am going to mention them. These are where we try to clarify norms, so they're very consistent with this kind of subjective norm from the from the theory of reasoned action or theory of planned behavior, where we want people to have appropriate reevaluations of themselves and their own behaviors. So they don't view themselves as completely inconsistent with the social norm or consistent with the social norm, depending on where they would fall. Environmental reevaluation. This one perhaps not as obscure as the previous process, but this is where we try to focus on how somebody's behavior doesn't impact themselves, but how it impacts somebody else or something else. That's very different from consciousness raising. So be careful not to confuse the two. In environmental reevaluation, we would cause somebody to reflect on, for example, for smoking, how their cigarette smoking influences or impacts their children. And so this was a brochure, a strategy based upon this process, where we are trying, and this was in the Northeast in Maine, trying to cause parents to reflect upon their behavior and how it influences their children. And in fact, many smoking cessation strategies are no longer targeting the smoker necessarily. Well, they're targeting the smoker, but they're not targeting the consequences to the smoker. But they will target consequences to the immediate family members of the smoker. And one intervention that some colleagues of mine did was they actually taught children how to reinforce their parents for not smoking, and how to kind of help parents in this environmental reevaluation process. So they would say things like, when you smoke around me, Mom, it really is hard for me to breathe, and I smell bad at school, and all of these other things. And then when the parent didn't smoke around them, they would say something like, Mom, I really appreciate it when you don't smoke around me. It helps me know that you love me and really care about me, because then I don't smell bad, or then I can breathe easier. Okay, now we're going to talk about some processes that are more consistent with, or more common and more effective at the latter stages of change. So things like counter-conditioning. And counter-conditioning is a process where we help people to learn new behaviors and replace behaviors that were unhealthy. So we'll also this semester talk about Pavlovian conditioning, or association.